Elena Voss had learned, over 3 long years, how to make herself small. She kept her eyes down when she walked through the halls of Ashwood Pack. She kept her voice quiet when she spoke, if she spoke at all. She had learned that the less space she took up, the less she was noticed, and the less she was noticed, the less she was hurt. It had not always been this way. 3 years ago, Elena had stood at the front of the Great Hall, wearing a pale blue dress, waiting for Damon, the Pack's beta, to complete their bonding ceremony. She remembered how her hands had trembled with hope, how she had believed, for one shining moment, that her quiet life as an Omega might become something more. Then Damon had looked at her, and looked away, and chosen someone else, an Alpha-born woman named Sabine, with fire in her eyes and Pack politics behind her name. He had rejected Elena in front of everyone, his voice flat and final, and Elena had felt something inside her chest crack open and never fully close again. Since that day, she had belonged to no one and mattered to no one. She was fed, because the Pack could not let an Omega starve without shame falling on them. She was sheltered, because the alternative would look worse to outsiders. But she was never welcomed. She scrubbed floors. She carried firewood. She served meals to people who would not look at her twice. The person who made sure Elena never forgot her place was Lady Miriam, Damon's mother, and the matriarch of Ashwood Pack. Miriam had never forgiven Elena for being chosen for her son in the first place, as if the fated bond itself had been some kind of insult. She found small ways to remind Elena of her worthlessness nearly every day. A sharp word here, a cold glance there, a chore given with just enough cruelty behind it to feel like punishment. Elena told herself she was used to it. She told herself it no longer stung. Most days, she almost believed it. Then came the gathering of packs. Every few years, Alpha Kings and their envoys traveled from across the region to meet at whichever pack hosted that season's gathering. Treaties were renewed, borders were discussed, and, quietly, unmated wolves were observed, in case a match might serve some future alliance. It was the grandest event Ashwood held, and this year, it was their turn to host. The Pack had been preparing for weeks. New banners were hung. The kitchens overflowed with meat and bread and wine. Every wolf in Ashwood had a role to play in making the Pack look strong and worthy in front of the visiting kings. Elena's role, naturally, was to serve. While other unmated wolves dressed in fine clothing and took their seats among the guests, hoping to catch the eye of a visiting alpha, Elena was given a plain gray dress and told to carry trays. Lady Miriam had arranged it herself, smiling as she explained that someone needed to see to the high table, and that Elena's presence among the guests would only embarrass the Pack. Elena did not argue. She never did. She simply nodded, put on the gray dress, and picked up the first tray of the evening. The great hall was filled with candlelight and laughter that night. Wolves from a dozen different packs mingled together, testing old alliances and forming new ones. At the head of the room sat the visiting Alpha Kings, each surrounded by their own advisors and kin. Elena moved between the tables carefully, balancing dishes, refilling cups, trying to remain as invisible as she had trained herself to be. She almost succeeded. It happened near the end of the second course. Elena was carrying a heavy tray of dishes toward the high table when her foot caught against the edge of a rug that had been laid too close to the walkway. She stumbled. The tray tipped. 2 plates slid and shattered against the stone floor, and a pitcher of wine spilled across the hem of her dress. The hall did not go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, starting from the tables nearest her, and spreading outward as heads turned to see what had happened. Lady Miriam was on her feet before Elena had even finished apologizing. "Of course," Miriam said, her voice carrying easily across the hall, sharp and clear enough for every guest to hear. "Of course this is the one we let serve our honored guests. Clumsy, careless. It is no wonder she was rejected." Elena felt her face burn. She dropped to her knees, trying to gather the broken pieces of porcelain, trying to disappear into the floor if she could. But Miriam was not finished. She crossed the hall in a few quick steps, reached down, and pulled the plain gray shawl from Elena's shoulders, the one piece of pack cloth she had still been allowed to wear. "You do not deserve to wear our colors," Miriam said. "You never did. You are an embarrassment to this pack, and I am ashamed every day that my son ever looked twice at you." The hall was utterly silent now. Elena stayed on her knees, staring at the broken porcelain in her hands, feeling 3 years of buried humiliation rise all at once in her throat. She did not cry. She had promised herself long ago that she would never cry in front of these people again, but it took everything she had to hold still. It was in that silence that a low growl rumbled through the hall, and it did not come from Lady Miriam, and it did not come from Elena. It came from the high table. Alpha King Cassian Thorn of the Blackthorn Kingdom rose to his feet. He was the most powerful wolf in the room, ruler of a kingdom 3 times the size of Ashwood, and every wolf present had felt the weight of his presence since he arrived that afternoon. Calm, controlled, unreadable. But he was not calm now. His eyes had shifted, gold bleeding into the dark brown, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier, charged with something ancient and undeniable. His wolf had been restless from the moment Elena entered the hall hours earlier. He had told himself it was nothing, a strange awareness he could not explain, easy to ignore among the noise and formality of the evening. But when Miriam pulled the shawl from Elena's shoulders and called her worthless, something inside him refused to stay seated any longer. "Enough," Cassian said. His voice was not loud, but it did not need to be. It cut through the hall like a blade, and every wolf present felt it in their bones, the unmistakable authority of an alpha king commanding silence. Lady Miriam froze, the shawl still clutched in her hand. Cassian stepped down from the high table and crossed the hall, his gaze fixed on Elena, still kneeling on the floor among the broken porcelain. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the wine soaking into the stone, ignoring the eyes of every king and alpha watching him. "Look at me," he said, gently. Elena lifted her eyes, startled, uncertain, braced for another blow, even though his voice held none of the cruelty she expected. The moment their eyes met, Cassian's wolf surged forward, with a certainty that left no room for doubt. He had crossed 3 kingdoms for treaties and trade, had sat through 100 formal dinners searching for nothing more than politics, and here, kneeling on a stone floor in a servant's gray dress, was the one thing his wolf had been waiting a lifetime to find. "Mate," he said quietly, so only she could hear it at first, though the words seemed to echo through the silent hall regardless. "You are my mate." Elena stared at him, certain she had misheard, certain this was some cruel trick, though nothing in his voice or his eyes suggested cruelty at all. Cassian rose to his feet and turned to face the hall, his hand extended toward Elena, waiting for her to take it.
"This woman," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "is my fated mate."
"My wolf has known it since she entered this hall, and I will not stand by while she is treated as anything less than what she is." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lady Miriam's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "This is a mistake," Miriam said quickly. "She is an Omega, already rejected once. She cannot possibly be fated to an Alpha King." "The bond does not care what she was called before," Cassian said, his tone final. "It only knows what she is." Elena, still kneeling, felt the world tilt sideways. 3 years of being told she was worthless, 3 years of small humiliations designed to keep her in her place, and now, an Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the region, was kneeling in front of her and calling her his mate in front of everyone who had ever looked down on her. She did not know how to trust it. Old habits ran deep, and hope had betrayed her badly once before. But Cassian did not move his hand away. He simply waited, patient, steady, until slowly, carefully, Elena reached out and let him help her to her feet. The days that followed were not simple. Lady Miriam did not accept defeat easily. She whispered to visiting alphas that the claim was false, an impulsive mistake made in the heat of an emotional moment. She tried, quietly, to have Elena's pack records altered, hoping to create enough doubt to delay or dissolve the bond before it could be formally recognized. Damon, watching from the sidelines, found himself unsettled by what he saw, an unfamiliar and uncomfortable regret creeping in as he realized what he had thrown away 3 years earlier. He made a few clumsy attempts to speak with Elena privately, as though some claim still lingered between them, but Elena, for the first time in years, did not feel obligated to listen. Cassian remained steady through all of it. He did not rush the bond. did not demand that Elena accept him simply because his wolf had chosen her. Instead, he gave her time, sat with her in quiet corners of the pack house, asked about her days, listened when she spoke, and said nothing when she did not. Slowly, carefully, Elena began to let herself believe that this steadiness was not a performance. It was simply who he was. The formal recognition ceremony was set for the final night of the gathering, when the mate bond between an alpha king and his chosen mate would be confirmed before all the visiting kingdoms. It was tradition, ancient and unbreakable, requiring no more than the bond mark itself to prove the truth of the claim. Lady Miriam made one last attempt. Standing before the assembled kings and alphas, she produced a set of altered records, claiming they proved Elena had once broken pack law and was therefore unfit to stand as any king's mate, let alone a queen. The hall stirred with murmurs of uncertainty. Paper and law were powerful things among the packs, and Miriam knew it. But paper could not undo what the bond itself would show. Cassian stepped forward and took Elena's hand in front of everyone. As their fingers intertwined, warmth spread beneath her skin, and slowly, unmistakably, a mark began to form along her wrist, glowing faintly gold before settling into the deep, permanent pattern of a true mate bond. Every wolf in the hall could see it. There was no forging that, no faking it, no denying what it meant. The murmurs turned to silence, then to quiet awe. Miriam's records fell from her hands, forgotten, useless against magic older than any pack law she could invoke. Damon, standing near the back of the hall, lowered his head, finally speaking the words Elena had waited 3 years to hear, though she no longer needed them the way she once had. He admitted, quietly, but clearly enough for those nearby to hear, that rejecting her had been the greatest mistake of his life, and that Ashwood's loss had become Blackthorn's fortune. Lady Miriam was stripped of much of her standing that night, the Pack Council no longer willing to overlook years of cruelty once the truth of Elena's worth stood undeniable before them. Elena barely heard any of it. She was looking at the mark on her wrist, then at Cassian, who was watching her with a warmth she had never known anyone to look at her with before. "You are not what they said you were," Cassian told her quietly, his hand still holding hers. "You never were." For the first time in 3 years, Elena let herself cry, not from pain, but from the strange, overwhelming relief of finally being seen. She left Ashwood Pack a few weeks later, not as the rejected Omega who had once been humiliated in front of a hall full of strangers, but as the future Queen of Blackthorn Kingdom, chosen not out of pity or convenience, but because an ancient bond had recognized in her something worth crossing kingdoms for. At her coronation, standing beside Cassian before his people, Elena wore no plain gray dress, carried no heavy trays, and lowered her eyes for no one. She stood tall, dressed in deep blue and gold, her wrist bearing the mark that had changed everything. Cassian took her hand before the crowd, the same way he had that night in the Ashwood Hall, and spoke softly enough that only she could hear. "No one will ever make you feel unworthy again," he said. "Not while I live." Elena smiled, steady and sure for the first time in longer than she could remember, and stepped forward to meet the life that had finally, truly become her own.